Inherited wealth dilemma: am I wrong for not putting my partner on the deed? My partner and I have been together for just over 3 years, and our relationship has always been strong and full of dreams for the future. One of the biggest milestones we've talked about is buying a house together. We both knew it would take time. Our plan was to save diligently, and within the next 5 years, we hope to have enough for a down payment. It was a shared goal we looked forward to achieving as a couple. But life has a way of throwing unexpected opportunities and challenges your way. Last month, I received news that changed everything. I had inherited a significant sum of money from a distant relative. To my surprise, it was enough to buy a house outright, without the need for a mortgage. At first, I was elated. This inheritance felt like a golden ticket to fast-track our plans and finally escape the cycle of renting. I imagined us moving into a place we could call our own, a home where we could start building our future. Excited to share the news, I sat down with my partner to discuss the possibilities. I told her about the inheritance and suggested that we could purchase a house sooner than we'd originally planned. However, I also explained that since I would be covering the entire cost using the inheritance, I would prefer to keep the house in my name alone. To me, this seemed like a reasonable boundary. The money was unexpected, and it came from my family's side. It felt fair to me to protect this inheritance while still including her in other aspects of our shared life. I emphasized that she wouldn't be paying rent. Her contributions would be limited to shared household expenses like utilities, groceries, and maintenance, essentially the same costs she'd have if we were renting together. I thought this was a practical solution that allowed us to benefit from the inheritance without complicating things financially. But her reaction wasn't what I expected. She looked hurt and said it felt unfair. "We've always talked about buying a house together," she said. "Why wouldn't we put both of our names on the deed? This is supposed to be our future." I was taken aback but tried to explain my perspective. "I'm not trying to be unfair," I told her. "But this is money I inherited, and I'm the one funding the purchase. I think it makes sense for the house to be in my name if I'm paying for it outright. That doesn't mean I don't see a future with you, it's just a practical decision." Her frustration didn't ease. "So you don't trust me?" she asked. "We've been together for years, and now you're treating me like I'm some outsider. This isn't how a partnership works." Feeling the tension rising, I offered a compromise. "If it's really important to you, we can wait until we've both saved enough to contribute equally to the purchase," I said. "Or, I could pay the full cost now, and you could pay the mortgage in your name until your contributions match my initial investment. Then we can add your name to the deed." She wasn't happy with either suggestion. "Why would we keep wasting money on rent when you have the money to buy a house now?" she argued. "And why should I have to prove anything to you by paying you back? We're supposed to be a team." Her words stung. I wasn't trying to exclude her or make her feel like she wasn't part of the plan. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that this inheritance was an unexpected windfall that came with its own complexities. It felt important to me to safeguard it, not because I didn't trust her, but because it was a personal financial decision. The conversation left me feeling conflicted. I could see her point. She wanted to feel like an equal partner in our future. But at the same time, her insistence on being added to the deed without contributing financially made me feel uneasy. Was I wrong to stand firm on this? Was it selfish to want to protect what felt like a family legacy, even if it meant upsetting her? Since that discussion, the tension between us has been palpable. She's been distant, and I can tell she's hurt. Meanwhile, I'm questioning everything. Am I being unreasonable by insisting on sole ownership? Should I prioritize our relationship over my financial concerns? Or am I right to set this boundary, even if it creates friction? I love her deeply, and I want to build a future with her. But this situation has left me feeling torn between my values and the desire to make her happy. How do I navigate this without jeopardizing our relationship, or my peace of mind? TL, Doctor, I recently inherited enough money to buy a house outright. I told my partner that if I use the inheritance to purchase the house, I'd prefer to keep it in my name only. She feels this is unfair and insists we should both be on the deed, even though she wouldn't contribute financially to the purchase. I offered alternatives, but she turned them down. Now I'm left questioning whether I'm handling this the right way. How would you deal with this situation? The days following our conversation were tense. My partner barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was curt and cold. Every glance, every sigh, every small gesture screamed disappointment. I hated the rift that had formed between us, but I didn't know how to bridge it. I started doubting myself. Was I being unreasonable? Could I have handled the situation differently? Late at night, I'd replay our conversations in my head, trying to pinpoint where things had gone wrong. A week later, I decided to confront the tension head-on. I invited her to sit down so we could talk, hoping to find some common ground. "I don't want this to come between us," I said. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, and I understand why you're upset. But I also need you to see where I'm coming from. This inheritance is unexpected, and I feel a responsibility to handle it carefully." Her face softened, but only slightly. "I get that it's a big deal," she said. "But don't you see how it feels from my side? We've been together for years, talking about our future, and now you're drawing this line like I'm not part of it." I nodded. "I understand. That's why I offered to wait until we both had enough saved or to add your name once your contributions matched mine. It's not about shutting you out, it's about being fair to both of us." She looked down, fiddling with her hands. "It just feels like you're protecting yourself from me," she said quietly. "Like you're planning for the worst." Her words struck a chord. I wasn't planning for the worst, I was planning for the unknown. But before I could respond, she said something that caught me off guard. "Can I ask you something?" she said, her tone hesitant. "Of course," I replied. "If we're going to be together long term, doesn't it make sense for everything to be shared? I mean, isn't that what marriage is about?" The mention of marriage surprised me. We'd talked about it in passing, but it had never felt imminent. Now, it seemed like she was using it as a bargaining chip. "I agree that marriage is about sharing a life," I said carefully. "But we're not married yet. And even if we were, I'd still want to have an honest conversation about finances and contributions. I think that's fair, don't you?" Her expression darkened. "So you're saying you'd still keep the house in your name even if we got married?" "That's not what I'm saying," I replied, frustrated. "I'm saying this is a complex situation, and I want to make decisions that protect both of us. This isn't about love or trust, it's about being practical." She stood up abruptly, pacing the room. "You're making it sound like I'm after your money or something. Is that what you think?" I froze. The thought had crossed my mind, but I didn't dare say it out loud. Her reaction to the inheritance had been so intense, so immediate, that I couldn't help but wonder if it was more about the money than the principle. "I'm not accusing you of anything," I said cautiously. "But this is a lot of money, and I need to be careful. Surely you can understand that." Her response was sharp. "If you really trusted me, you wouldn't need to be so careful." That statement lingered in the air, heavy and accusatory. I didn't know how to respond. Over the next few days, things only got worse. She started avoiding me, staying out late, and barely speaking to me when she was home. I chalked it up to her needing space, but something didn't sit right. One evening, when she left her laptop open on the coffee table, I noticed an open tab on her browser. I hesitated. Invading her privacy wasn't something I'd ever considered before. But something compelled me to look closer. It was a real estate website. She'd been looking at properties, not just locally, but in other cities. And the kicker? Some of the listings had notes attached, mentioning joint ownership and mortgage plans. My heart sank. Was she planning something behind my back? When she came home that night, I confronted her. "Why are you looking at houses?" I asked, holding up the laptop. Her face turned pale. "You went through my stuff?" "I didn't mean to," I said. "But now I'm asking you, why are you looking at properties?" She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room. I was just curious. You've been so focused on this inheritance, I started thinking about what I'd do if I were in your position." Her words felt off, like there was something she wasn't telling me. "Are you planning to buy a house?" I asked directly. "No," she said, too quickly. "Of course not. I don't have that kind of money." But her reaction only deepened my suspicion. Suddenly, I started seeing things in a new light, the way she'd been pushing for joint ownership, her frustration when I suggested alternatives, and now this. Was this about love and partnership? Or was there something else going on? For the first time in our relationship, I felt a wall go up between us, a barrier of doubt and mistrust that I wasn't sure we could overcome. And as much as I wanted to believe in us, I couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. And I needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. The tension between us had reached a breaking point. Days turned into weeks, and while my partner's behavior became more erratic, I found myself growing increasingly wary. The discovery of her real estate searches lingered in my mind, raising questions I wasn't sure I wanted answers to. One evening, after another strained dinner, she announced she was heading out to meet some friends. As she grabbed her bag and left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. For weeks now, her friend outings had become more frequent, and her explanations felt vague. That night, I made a decision I wasn't proud of. I decided to follow her. I waited a few minutes after she left, grabbed my keys, and drove after her. She wasn't heading toward the usual spots where she met her friends. Instead, she pulled into a quiet neighborhood and parked in front of a modest but well-kept house. My heart raced as I watched her knock on the door. A man answered. He looked to be in his early 30s, dressed casually, and greeted her with a warm smile. She stepped inside without hesitation, and the door closed behind her. I sat in my car, stunned. Who was he? And why was she here? Part of me wanted to storm up to the house and demand answers, but I forced myself to stay put. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without evidence. After about an hour, she emerged, laughing and holding a stack of papers. The man walked her to her car, their conversation animated. When they parted ways, I saw him give her a lingering hug. I drove home, my mind spinning. I knew I couldn't let this go without confronting her, but I needed to approach it carefully. The next day, while she was in the shower, I noticed the stack of papers she'd brought home sitting on the kitchen counter. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started flipping through them. What I found made my blood run cold. They were mortgage applications and property agreements, filled out in her name. The properties listed were modest but definitely within the range of someone with access to a significant amount of money. My inheritance. She was planning to buy a house. Without me. I confronted her that evening, laying the papers on the table. Care to explain this? I asked, my voice shaking. Her face turned white as she realized what I was holding. It's not what it looks like, she stammered. Then tell me what it is, I demanded. Because it sure looks like you've been planning to use my inheritance to buy a house for yourself. She sat down, her hands trembling. It's not like that, she said. I was just exploring options, in case things didn't work out between us. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. In case things didn't work out? I echoed. You've been planning an escape route this whole time? Tears welled up in her eyes. I didn't mean to hurt you. I felt like you didn't trust me. And then I started thinking, what if you decided to leave me? I wouldn't have anything. I needed a backup plan. Her confession left me speechless. I'd always trusted her, but this felt like a betrayal on a level I couldn't comprehend. You were going to use my money to secure your backup plan? I asked, my voice rising. Do you even hear yourself? She broke down, sobbing. I wasn't thinking clearly. I just felt so insecure about everything, about us. I didn't know how else to protect myself. As much as I wanted to empathize with her fears, I couldn't ignore the sheer audacity of her actions. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. This was calculated. The next few days were a blur of heated arguments and strained silences. Eventually, I told her I needed space to process everything. She packed a bag and left to stay with a friend, leaving me alone in the apartment we'd shared. Now, as I sit here surrounded by the fragments of our relationship, I'm left wondering, was this the ultimate betrayal, or a cry for help from someone who felt lost and insecure? Can we rebuild from this, or has the damage gone too far? TL, Doctor, I discovered that my partner was secretly planning to use my inheritance to buy a house in her name as a backup plan in case our relationship didn't work out. She claims it was driven by insecurity, but I'm left questioning everything about our future together.